Do you not realize that the state is the worst enemy you have? It is a machine that crushes you in order to sustain the ruling class.
She was a spellbinder of a speaker.
Demonstrate before the palaces of the rich. Demand work. If they do not give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, take bread. It is your sacred right.
Emma Goldman was somebody who throughout her entire life endured police.
Abrasive
German and Russian, so lips met in a spontaneous...
America's foremost man of letters, novelist Theodore Dreiser, in the United States to Russia, aboard the SS Buford. The exile would last for the rest of their lives.
4:20 a.m., December 21st, 1919. I felt dizzy, envisioning a transport of politicals doomed to Siberia. Russia of the past rose before me. Through the porthole, I could see the great city receding into the distance. It was my beloved city. It was America, repeating the terrible scenes of Tsarist Russia. I glanced up. The Statue of Liberty.
She was cast out of this country, the U.S., and went to Russia in 1919 until 1921, when she was so appalled by the Kronstadt, really.
If Berkman and Goldman chafed at the restrictions on their freedom in capitalist America, they would find Lenin's Russia even more oppressive. The two exiled anarchists quickly concluded that the Bolshevik Revolution was a smothering democratic free expression. Emma pushed for a personal meeting with Lenin in the Kremlin, where she presented a petition of questions and anarchist demands.
I try to envision her, you know, in that meeting with Lenin. Have you ever thought about that? This little Jewish-looking lady, you know, kind of dumpy, you know, meeting with Lenin, and you know, and actually being very straightforward with him and telling him, you know, what was important to her.
What is the attitude of the Soviet government to the anarchists? Why are the anarchists being arrested and imprisoned? We demand full freedom of speech and press throughout Soviet territory.
Lenin brushed their questions aside. Free speech, he sneered, was a bourgeois notion. In 1920,
they had instigated proof they were the most pernicious enemies of the revolution. On December 1st, 1921, I left Russia in the company of Alexander Berkman, my voice against the crimes committed in the name of the revolution.
Soon, she and Sasha would go their separate ways. He to France, she to different countries in Europe, eventually arriving on the 27th of November, 1926, in Toronto, a day's travel from her family in Rochester.
Canada was a symbol of exile for Emma.
At Union Station, supporters and Toronto's illustrious visitor.
Dear Leon, I was met by a lot of comrades, warm-hearted and eager. I enclose an article which appeared in the Star this morning. The man who wrote this is the most intelligent and best-informed reporter I've met in a long while, more of an anarchist than he realizes. I think the Star will help much with my meetings.
She arrived, and all of the children, we were all waiting for her. She was nothing like I expected. I thought she'd be tall and Nordic. Instead, I saw this strange little figure, but very imposing.
Well, I kind of idolized her, I guess. I don't know, from everything that my father had told me about her, and being brought up in an atmosphere of anarchism, I thought she was great. She fought for birth control. She was anti-war, and these were all the ideals that my father fought for.
She was very influential. She was very liked, adored.
She gathered such a marvelous collection of people. She had a great gift for friendships.
More than anything is the spirit of the group in this city. Such a warm-hearted, eager, jovial, and sociable lot I have not come in touch with in years. People in Europe are dead compared to the bunch here.
In Toronto, Emma lived in a series of dilapidated apartments in the teeming Jewish immigrant neighborhood around Spadina Avenue, now Toronto's Chinatown. Toronto Star reporter Fred Griffin tracked her down.
You can't imagine the gigantic United States being scared of a woman, and yet they put her out darkly at dead of night. Who will say that Emma Goldman is not the most interesting and distinguished of her present-day sisterhood? She has lived more fully, rebelled more strenuously and unselfishly, suffered more vividly, thought more vigorously. Of her day and generation, she is the social Joan of Arc. To find her, I climbed a dark stairway. At the head of them, in the shadows, was a locked door at which I knocked. It was all very mysterious. Was I not about to enter, alone, the most secret haunt of a bomb-hurling, blood-curdling, temple-wrecking enemy of the social order?
Despite these purple passages, Frederick Griffin's Star article actually treated Goldman's ideas in life thoughtfully. Emma's reaction?
Dearest Leon, the Weekly Star had the enclosed article. Splendid propaganda for our ideas, don't you think?
Emma basked in the admiration of her Toronto comrades.
They believed every word she said. They considered her as a teacher. It's an important branch of the workmen's circle.
They were philosophical anarchists. Not one of them would have been a threat to anybody. You know, they were all big talkers.
Even with all this support, Emma was often annoyed by her life in Toronto. She swung back and forth between appreciating the city and being irked by its conservatism. She encountered great mahal for her birth control lectures.
Well, it was against the law to give out information. It just seemed that the Catholic Church was very, very interested in preventing the dissemination of birth control information.
Anti-religious themes might do well because the churches are so powerful here. But with the idiotic blasphemy law, which is very rigid, one does not know just what may fall under it. I certainly have no desire to go to prison for the Lord.
She didn't like Toronto at all. She said it was too conservative for her. She couldn't express herself. No one seemed to understand her, what she was all about.
What was Toronto like in...
Dull. Dull. So provincial. Except the people who gathered around Emma. They were all young and longing to get the inspiration, I guess, or to get a whiff of free air, fresh air from outside, because she seemed to bring the world to your eyes.
In Toronto, there was a fascinating movement of young people, immigrants, sort of thirsting for knowledge, for culture.
Emma Goldman's meetings ranged widely, from modern drama and literature to lectures on birth control, female sexuality, and capitalist exploitation.
Her thoughts across, her ideas across, very forcefully and dogmatically, I think.
She was wonderful during the question period. She just came back with answers so spontaneously, so quickly, and so sure.
Dearest Sash, I spoke on crime last night. The questions were so hopelessly out of date, more stupid than anything I ever heard in America 20 years ago. One might meet with the same backwardness in Tennessee, but certainly not in any large city in America. Imagine this is a university town. Well, it is awful.
It's ironic. Even as Goldman waxed nostalgic about the progressive American climate, just outside Boston, the flawed trial of two Italian-born anarchists was taking place. A cloud of doubt still hangs over the case of Sacco and Vanzetti. Were they guilty of murder and robbery committed in 1920 at the height of the Red Scare? Or were they tried and executed in 1927 because of their anarchist politics? The Sacco and Vanzetti case became a watershed in American political life.
Well, when I was a kid, my mother and father were involved in meetings and in protests and things like that. I guess the week before they were executed, I'm not sure exactly when, but very close to execution day, my mother read me a letter that was translated into Yiddish that Sacco had written to his son. And the details of Sacco writing to his son, telling him about the future, and about him, how it just did something to me that when I think of it now, still brings tears to my eyes.
Daddy evoked Christ-like images of the good shoemaker and the poor fish peddler, crucified by the state.
When they were put to death, I was still living in Toronto. She organized a memorial. She asked me to read this long poem in praise of Sacco and Vanzetti, and she just had the audience spellbound.
Now, less than ever, would I want to go to America. Its bloodthirsty nature, as demonstrated in the Sacco and Vanzetti case, is too much for me. Whatever may be said of Canada, I don't believe such gross injustice or such horrible callousness would be demonstrated by any judge here.
Even though she respected its civility, Goldman considered Canada a backwater. She longed to be where the action was, in the United States. But J. Edgar Hoover's America remained off limits.
And she would sit at the border and sob, look at the lake and sob because she longed so much to be back in the United States.
Emma had been quietly soliciting contributions so that she could write her autobiography and reaffirm her place in American history. Her plans were to go to Saint-Tropez to join Alexander Berkman in the south of France. She missed his companionship, and even more, his steady editorial hand. She sailed for France December 21st, 1920, Russia, bought for her by the wealthy American art patron Peggy Guggenheim.
I often regret that my father didn't allow me to go to Saint-Tropez with her. I would have loved to have done that. He said, no, you can't go. I don't know why. Corrupted by her?
I remember when I told her I was quitting the theater because I was getting married. I had already had a boyfriend in New York before she sent me off theaters. And when I told her that I was going to marry him, she thought that was dreadful. She was very disappointed in me. She said, Aura, live with this young man if you care about him so much. But for goodness sakes, don't give up your career that you've hardly started.
Living My Life was published in 1931 to international acclaim. The New York Times Book Review gave it front-page coverage. The periodical The Nation called it one of the notable books of the year.
I couldn't wait to read it. And my father saw me reading it, actually, and he said, what are you reading? And I said, I'm reading Emma Goldman's autobiography. He says, no, I don't want you to read it. He said, why, Papa? Because you're too young to read about her life. She was writing about her love affairs. He didn't want me to know about her sexual encounters. I mean, he didn't want me to be that kind of woman, right? I don't know what kind of woman he wanted me to be, but he didn't want me to be Emma Goldman.
I have a friend who, when I told her we were volunteering here, she said, wow, she said, Emma's book changed my life. That was Miriam. She said, she absolutely changed my life. And that's when I read the book 40 years later.
Living My Life did more than open eyes. It raised eyebrows. Emma's candid accounts of her numerous lovers caused a stir in anarchist circles. Most radicals, in fact, were pretty straight-laced when it came to sex.
This was very shocking to me when I found out in latter years what kind of a life she had led.
The men were very predominant in her life.
Sometimes I think that her relationships with some of these later life, I don't know, may have been as passion.
Throughout her adult life, Emma had been attracted to younger men. Possibly the best illustration of this was her tumultuous 10-year relationship with a Chicago hobo turned gynecologist, Dr. Ben Reitman. Intimate letters unearthed in Chicago by Candace Falk reveal her anguish, often addressed to Hobo and signed Mommy.
Hobo, you came to me like a stroke of lightning, kindling my soul and body with mad passion as I've never known before. You have consumed me, sopped me up into your blood. When you go away, you leave me weak and nerveless. Yet when you stay, you cause me tortures of hell.
First time he came into our house, the only thing I remember about him was a big hat. He was tall, husky guy. And that's the way I recall him. And he was wearing this great big sombrero hat.
I remembered in her autobiography that she had said that Reitman's letters put her mind, were like a narcotic to her. They made her heart beat faster, but they put her brain to sleep.
I want to pet and humor you, to be a loving sweetheart, but when we're together, business, propaganda, so many things interfere. You're such a powerful creature, it's difficult to be a simple lover to you. Baby, I want you. I love you. Oh, love me. Understand me, Mommy. I love you. Hobo.
Your psychology is promiscuous. You have no sense of selection, are attracted by any woman, and will have relations with her. Before I knew you, I cared for other men and was intimate with them. Now, though these men stimulate me, I cannot give way.
A lot of the themes of the letters were really about jealousy.
You have been in the arms of every woman who wanted you.
She felt that she was the great spokesperson for free love and free expression. And here in her own intimate life, she felt so torn apart, really, and so humiliated by her lover, Ben Reitman, who would stand at the corner of a room where she was lecturing and scan the audience for a good pickup for the evening and leave with her.
In her public life, Emma was actually quite discreet about her passionate relationships. Nevertheless, besides Sasha Berkman, her friend for life, and Ben Reitman, the grand passion of her life, many other lovers passed through her doors.
How times have changed. Emma Goldman, exiled as a dangerous anarchist 15 years ago, is back again on a 90-day permit.
In 1934, Emma was again residing in Toronto. Following intense lobbying by highly placed American friends, Emma Goldman was admitted to the U.S. for a 90-day lecture tour, with the proviso that she not speak about political topics.
No longer the fiery red Emma, she seems considerably tamed as she
has been one of the very few men in the White House who has come to realize the right of the and to better their conditions by means of their organized power.
Soon after the tour finished, Emma returned to Toronto, then left again for France, deeply worried about Berkman's failing health. He had prostate cancer. In 1936, racked with pain, Sasha committed suicide on Emma's birthday. Plunged into despair, Emma's spirits recovered only when the anarchists in Spain asked if she would come to Barcelona. They needed help in the civil war against General Franco's fascist army. As the English-language voice of propaganda and fundraising, Emma was once again the fiery public orator. Based mainly in London, Emma poured her heart into it. But by the spring of 1939, the battle was lost. Franco declared victory.
I'll never forget her dreadful stories about how the communists were blocking the anarchists in Spain and how she blamed the whole loss of Spain to Franco on the communists, that they just sabotaged the anarchist revolution.
Goldman's efforts now turned to raising money for Spanish anarchist refugees. Despising her life in England, Emma crossed the Atlantic to Canada for the final time.
So that was the summer of '39. She had just come back from Spain and was, really, I remember how unhappy a person she was then from letters that she had written, because she'd lost, the Spanish Revolution had gone down the drain, and Berkman had died.
Back in Toronto, her first meeting was well attended, but the audiences soon dropped off. Emma attributed this to the lickspittle patriotism of the average Canadian as the country stood on the brink of war. Her arrival also happened to coincide with a royal visit.
The fake patriotism for the king and queen made everybody hysterical and mad only for one thing: to get a glimpse of the poor creatures who are being so vulgarly commercialized.
Emma arranged housing for herself with comrades.
June 4th, 1939. My dear Leon, I have had to fix up my little apartment about the 100th time in my life. This is the first time in Canada that I'm living in my own place. Oh yes, I had several apartments on Spadina Avenue, but they were always furnished abominably and the rooms were depressing. The apartment I have now is small, but sunny and cheery, everything in good taste and with lovely people.
She lived with Tom and Dean Melis, Dutch couple on Vaughan Road. And I think they had a bedroom upstairs, and she had 2 rooms. She had her bedroom and a little kitchen or something where she could make herself some food if she wanted to.
With Emma now back in Toronto, 18-year-old anarchist Audrey Goodfriend decided to hitchhike up from New York to visit her heroine.
There was a meeting in Emma's house, and they had an international group, and there were Jews and Italians, and I guess some Spaniards and Dutch comrades where Emma lived, and we were welcome to come. So we immediately set out for that meeting. We rang the bell. My memory of that is so clear. I'll never forget the memory of Emma came down and opened the door. Old woman with a shawl over her head, and face wrinkled. You know, I remember going up the stairs and feeling, oh, wow, look what happens to a person that gets old. Look what happens. But later on in the evening, she started talking. And she removed her shawl. I guess she was warm enough. And the liveliness of this person, you know, the strength of her voice, the commanding quality of how she addressed everybody and everything was absolutely fabulous. Everybody was sitting around, and Emma made her a special coffee with a special coffee pot. And I felt too ashamed, you know, that to be in the same room with Emma Goldman was a very important thing for me.
Also in the room that evening was Arturo Bortolotti, an Italian-born anarchist who would soon be the focus of Emma's last battle. He and Emma were already fast friends and would often go on outings to the countryside or down to Windsor to gaze across the river at Detroit on the American side.
He had a car, so she told him what to do, where to go, and how to drive, etc., etc., etc. I mean, she was ordering Art around, you know, really ordering him around. And he seemed to be okay with it. But I remember there was a kind of imperious quality to her voice, remember, you know. Art. See, I remember that quality of it.
Bossy Emma may have been, but she was also a loyal friend and comrade. Shortly after Audrey's visit, Bortolotti and several other foreign-born anarchists were arrested and thrown into jail under the newly proclaimed War Measures Act.
They really railroaded him, right. They knew what they were going to get him some way or another.
If convicted on trumped-up charges of possessing seditious literature and firearms, Bortolotti would be deported to Mussolini's fascist Italy. Emma immediately recognized the grave consequences of a conviction, for Bortolotti personally and for freedom in wartime Canada. Even in exile, wherever she was located, Goldman fought for free speech, and in 1939 her political arena was Canada.
November 13th, 1939. Dearest Fitz, I do not have to tell you what would happen to Arthur if he were sent to Italy. The very thought makes me shiver. He might be saved with an energetic campaign. This is just the rub here. We have no movement and no comrades to speak of, no public-spirited men or women in this city. In point of fact, the Liberals are as yellow as the rest.
Almost single-handedly, Emma organized Bortolotti's defense.
She went at it, tooth and nail, worked very, very hard, writing here, there, getting in contact with the lawyers.
As the autumn of 1939 advanced, nationalism crackled through the world. On September 10th, Canada declared war on Nazi Germany. Goldman was embroiled in political activity and public speaking, raising money for Spanish anarchist refugees, working on the Bortolotti case, attacking Hitler and Stalin. In December, she extended her speaking tour to Winnipeg, returning to Toronto exhausted.
Dearest Bunya, I arrived here terribly tired and aching in every bone. The train shook more than a ship in the highest storm, and the bed was harder than ever. I suppose my old bones can't stand such torture as easily as they could years ago.
At age 70, Emma Goldman still filled every day with work. But years of exile, jolting train rides, police surveillance, constant public appearances, all had taken their toll. On a bitterly cold morning in February, Toronto lay locked in an icy grip. Inside her apartment, Emma arose to her usual routine, churning out letters, rallying anarchist support. She planned to attend a libertarian meeting in the evening. A letter from Dean Mealis recounts the sudden turn of events.
Emma had been active all day, dictating letters in the afternoon, and after supper even helping with the dishes. About 8 o'clock she came downstairs and had been talking and laughing with us for little more than half an hour, when suddenly, without a sound, she slumped down in her chair.
I had taken dictation that morning. I worked with her 2-3 hours that day. And I no sooner got home when the telephone rang that she had had a stroke and was taken to the hospital. When I went to see her, she tried to tell me things, she tried to speak to me, and she kept calling me over, and I went over to her, and she just couldn't speak.
One of the greatest orators of her time, Emma Goldman never again spoke. After 6 weeks, the hospital sent her home, unable to do any more. Emma was carried up to her room, where she lingered for another 2 months until hit by a second stroke.
Papa called. And, you know, it was a death in the family.
May 14th, 1940. Emma's body was taken to the Labor Lyceum on Spadina Avenue for a memorial service. Then, in a casket, she finally crossed the U.S. border. Emma Goldman was buried in Chicago's Waldheim Cemetery on May 17th. The exile was over.
A couple of years ago, when I started thinking about my own end, I thought, well, you know, what do I want to do with my ashes? That, yes, I really wanted my ashes scattered in Waldheim. So I told my kids. They said, well, Mom, when are we, you know, we'll have to keep them until we go to Chicago. I said, well, we'll go to Chicago someday and see the cemetery. I have to go back to Chicago, actually, and see the statue and see the gravestones again. I do. I will one of these days.
Emma Goldman died 60 years ago, but her memory and many of her ideals live on. Emma's causes, birth control, free speech, draft resistance, women's sexuality, workers' rights, anti-totalitarianism, all these remain ideas that animate progressive thought today. On Broadway, Emma is depicted in the musical Ragtime. In Hollywood, in the movie Reds. In Iowa, heartland of America, the name Emma Goldman still resonates. The mugs, the T-shirts, and the saying associated with her, "If I can't dance, it's not my revolution," stand as a rebuke to grim ideologists everywhere. In Toronto, in Berkeley, wherever young dissidents gather, we see the legacy of Emma. Anarchic graffiti continue to adorn buildings near her Spadina Avenue apartment. Find the public Emma Goldman, the famous anarchist. What my search uncovered was a much more complicated woman, one whose intimate friendships and passions extended far beyond the political realm. Yet her politics informed every aspect of her personal life.
Was my life worth living? If I had my life to live over again, like anyone else, I should wish to alter minor details, but in any of my more important actions and attitudes, I would repeat my life as I have lived it.